right, folks. Hope you enjoy the show. Like we said, we probably won't be interacting too much during the meat of it, but we'll chat with y'all afterwards. Let's do it. Let's go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by the man who just keeps on walking, despite the fact that the book has been over for like a week now. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt? How's your walk?
The walk never ends, Scott. I'll be chasing that shadowy figure for the rest of my days.
This week on the show, we are taking one final look at Stephen King's Richard Bachman's The Long Walk, and one, I guess not final, but one for a good while last look at Richard Bachman, because we are going to be talking about Bachman one more time during the season. But this is our overview episode. If this is the first book of ours you've covered, we do this at the very end of our chapter by chapter, beat by beat episodes, where we just want to step back, look at the book as a whole, and talk about it holistically one more time before we move on to other books. So that's what we're going to be doing today with The Long Walk. And then, of course, we have some mailbag questions from our audience that we're going to answer. Some questions about this book, some questions about King in general, and some random questions about the world. I hope you're ready. Hope you're ready to step into a political quagmire here, Matt.
Oh
One
God.
of the questions is, who are you voting for in 2024?
Oh my God.
I'm kidding. That's not how that works.
Okay.
All right. Are you ready to do it, Matt?
Let's do it.
Let's go into it. Let's talk. So I wanted to start today's conversation just talking about Bachman in particular, because I mean, that's the reason why we cover this book, right? You know, we're doing kind of a greatest hits series, and one of the things we wanted to cover was his alter ego. And, you know, I think you had a lot of not direct, but kind of indirect knowledge of who Richard Bachman was, or what Richard Bachman was, before coming into this book. So I'm wondering here at the end of this book, we finished reading this. What is your view of Bachman based on The Long Walk?
Yeah, I definitely had some preconceptions. I think those preconceptions were biased a bit by the stuff that I'd been exposed to. This book is a lot less funny than I thought Bachman was sort of supposed to be.
Oh, interesting.
And it was also, I don't know, it was okay. I can't talk about Bachman without talking about the fact that this is probably like top 3 favorite book that we've read on this show.
Okay.
Which I guess necessarily means that Bachman has some really amazing stuff in there. I guess I kind of had this preconception that Bachman was like second string novels, almost, that King like wrote some novels and in the back of his mind he's like, this is not a very good novel. I don't want this published under the name of Stephen King. It'll damage my brand, but I'll put it out there on the Bachman label, see how it does. That doesn't seem to be the case with this novel at all. I mean, I think not only do I think this is a great novel, I think that Stephen King thinks this is a good novel.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I agree. I think he does. The one thing, reading the introduction, the 5 or so weeks ago we did it, the thing that really struck me was when he goes, you know, these books I wrote in this collection, in this Bachman book collection, they're all pretty good. The best one in this is Roadwork, which I know you haven't read, but it's not a bad novel. I would put Roadwork more in that classification of what you were just talking about, where it's kind of more of a B tier novel, not the author's finest work, and it's a perfect thing to put under a pen name. I found it surprised that he didn't in that introduction glowingly talk up this book, because I think this is absolutely the best Bachman book, and I agree with you. I think this is just a really, really good Stephen King book. Yeah, this is one, no pen name necessary, because this is just a really, really solid book from beginning to end. So yeah, I mean, I think that preconceived notion of you had of Bachman would be fair. I do think this is one of the books that really breaks that mold, though.
Okay.
And maybe that's because, you know, this was not a book that when he wrote it, he was like, I am going to write this book as a book that released under my pen name, like
Mhm.
some of the other Bachman books have been, where he wrote them kind of knowing, or at least in the back of his head, that this could be a good Bachman novel that I'm writing right now. This was something he wrote in college. He wrote it as Stephen King, and then later made that transition to, this is going to be a Bachman story, which is another interesting point, because it's like you got to wonder when he's looking through his trunk novels and being like, are any of these good enough to release? Like, he looked at this one and said, I don't know if I want to put my name on this, which is an interesting choice, I think.
Yeah, right. This might be, it might be something along the lines of what I was saying, where, maybe I feel like I, I kind of have, let me put it this way. It's hard to have an objective view on your own work ever.
Sure.
I think even if you're a professional, even if you're Stephen King, it's hard to have an objective view on your own work. And I think there's probably some kind of inclination to look at something you wrote in college, even if you spruced it up and made it up to your more current standards, and think, this is this is before I had developed. This is my early work. This is just not hitting at the level that I'm capable of. And it's possible to be wrong about that, which
Yeah.
if that is what King thinks about this novel, I get I'd like to put this on the ever expanding list of things that I would say to him if I ever talked to him. I would just be like, you should take a second look at The Long Walk, the novel that you wrote,
Yeah.
because I think it's pretty incredible, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder, like, what a 76, 74, I can't remember how old he is, year old Stephen King would think about this novel in particular. Like, we've asked this questions many times throughout the course of this project. I think we asked it specifically Insomnia. It's like, hey, you wrote this as a middle-aged man pondering what it would be like to get old. Hey, you're old now. How do you feel about that depiction?
Yeah.
This is a book very much like, I think this is a book very much written by a very young man who is talking about the world from the perspective of a young man, and more specifically looking at, men slightly younger than him, and their experience in the world. I do wonder what he would think of it now.
Mhm.
I know he wrote the introduction for the Bachman novels, I think in the 80s, and then the version you had was an updated version of that came out in the mid 90s. But that's, I don't want to say this, but God, that's almost 30 years ago now. And of course, the man has changed a lot since then. So
Yeah.
I wish I had like a good answer to that general question of, what do I think Stephen King would think of this book now? I don't.
Mhm.
I wonder if it would, if he would think it's too angry.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's the thing, is I was expecting it to be angrier. We've talked about this repeatedly, but I was expecting it to be more cynical. And okay, and I want to like nail this down, because like it's definitely a downer. Like, it's the
Yeah.
most downer ending of any of the books we've covered. I unless I'm like missing something. It's the most
I
downer.
guess that depends on your interpretation of the end of the Dark Tower. But no, I gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, the dark that's a fair statement, actually, but aside from that, it was a huge downer. Huge downer. And it does not have kind of the sentimentality that I think is in almost any of his other novels. I'm just rapidly flipping through his other novels, and like even when bad things happen in the end, he usually gives you some feeling. Like for example, even the ending of The Stand, it's like a lot of bad stuff happens. We're not really sure if humans are redeemable, but we'll just kind of have to do our best, right? And it's like that's a much more positive sentiment than just everyone died, Garrity's mind and body are broken, and this is just gonna keep happening.
Yeah.
And furthermore, this is a direct statement about our world and the way that we are as people and as a country. So I don't know. I mean, maybe he thinks that is too dark. I think it's like perfect. Like in his quest to write his own version of Lord of the Flies, this is it. This is this is perfect. This is the Stephen King version of Lord of the Flies, or
Yeah.
So it strikes the perfect note. Like I this is going to be a book that I recommend to people.
I'm actually mad we didn't specifically say that earlier in our coverage of the novel, that
Uh-huh.
this is just King's Lord of the Flies, because I mean, you're 100% right. It certainly is. And I do agree with you that, like, I think, and part of this is because we watched Thinner, and I told you this was a Bachman book, and part of the reason is we had to talk about The Running Man, and you knew that was a Bachman book, and I just, this idea of like, oh, these are like dark, gritty, like B B story, sex crazed, depressing, the world is awful novels, and yeah, and that is contrary to, we've said, we've accused King of being a softie many times before, that, for all the darkness and the horror and the evil he writes about, at the end of the day, I think he's a person that genuinely believes in goodness, and wants and believes that things will turn out okay in the end. And these Bachman books seem to be explicitly not that. I do think that this book, while you're right, is depressing and has a dark ending, it's not as, I don't know, there's something like, a book like Thinner, which I know was technically published as a King book, but only because Bachman was discovered during the course of the publishing. He wrote that as a Bachman book. A book like Thinner, a story like Thinner, because I know you haven't read the book, but you've seen the movie, is like a story that says everyone is terrible. People are awful. Everyone sucks. No exceptions. We're all shit people, and everyone's going to deserve what they get. Um, that's not really the story. I mean, the story is about a system being broken, and how that system is abusing and destroying our young men. And like, they're not great people in this group. There's some bad people, but there's some really good people too. And like, the story is a tragedy of how Garrity was kind of destroyed by this system. But like, Garrity himself is not a monster, right? He's not a terrible person. He doesn't, at the end of the day, choose to do the monstrous thing, right? He just keeps on walking, and that's the downer part of it.
Yeah.
Is that perhaps the system itself is not going to be correctable. That this is not something that, we think that, oh, these young men are capable of overthrowing this system. And I guess maybe the reason that it's not as oppressively dour as some of the other Bachman stories goes back to, again, this idea that, no, this was an angry young man writing an angry college level screed at the system that we live under, in the middle of a war in which young men were being sent over to die for nothing. And so it's not everything is awful. It's this specific thing is awful, and I'm going to examine this by showing all sides of the boys that are thrown into this and destroyed.
Yeah, I was going to say, because even Barkovich is cast in sympathetic light, and I actually felt bad when he died.
Yeah.
And just, more generally, I've had a lot of investment in all these characters. Just more than in, I would say much more than in the vast majority of books that we read. We read a lot of books. We read a lot of Stephen King books. We read a lot of non-Stephen King books. I cared more about like McVries and Garrity and Stebbins and some of their friends in that group than I've cared about like 95% of the characters we've read about recently. And that, that's coming out of this Bachman book, where it's, I'm mainly just saying that to illustrate how not Thinner it is, right? Because based on your description of Thinner, it's like, oh, I hate all of these people, I hope they die soon. That's the I didn't. That's the fun thing about this book, is you don't want any of them to die, but they all are going to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I mean, like, there's a lot. We talked last week about the crowd and about the culpability of the society that lives amongst and under this thing. And there's definite anger towards that in general, right? The people. But I also feel like the book also kind of treats the crowd as just like a symptom of humanity, right? That, like, we're not necessarily saying that, like, I hate these people. Like, it's not necessarily that, like, every individual person in this crowd is culpable, and they need to reckon with their culpability. It's like, oh, this is just part of human nature. This is what happens when you collect a large number of people together and manipulate them in a certain way, they turn into this thing that is almost explicitly anti-human,
Yeah.
non-human.
So the main, I think, I don't know about main, but something like a massive distinction between King and Bachman emerges here, because I think that the antidote to this that King suggests is to stand, which is this concept that exists in various forms throughout many of his novels, going back all
Yeah.
the way back to like Salem's Lot, really, is this idea that
Mhm.
like evil is powerful, and if you do nothing, or if you run, or if you hide, it will just eat you up and destroy everything you love, and you really have no choice other than to stand in the face of evil. And that doesn't mean you're going to survive. Like, that's one thing I remember about Black House was I was actually kind of surprised at how few of our good guys make it out of that novel, despite the fact that it's, that they made the right choice, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're going to survive. I think that's consistent, really. I mean, the same thing happens in the Dark Tower. To stand does not guarantee you're going to win, but it's kind of all you can do to save your soul.
Yeah.
That's the major theme of the Dark Tower, happens over and over. And that idea does not come up at all in this novel. This novel, there's no like, nobody stands. The closest thing we get to anybody standing is one of the kids attacks the half track, gets blown away. It's totally pointless. The end. That's barely even qualifies, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's like the optimism of King, is the belief that there is something you can do about it. Even if you can't save yourself, you can maybe save your soul.
Yeah. No, I like that, the concept of stand to be true, and then the other side of that coin is the concept of evil eventually destroying itself. Right? That this idea that there exists in this world this dichotomy of good and evil, and good, what's required out of you is to just be true to yourself, to stand against the darkness. And fortunately for you, if you do that, evil will eventually sow the seeds of its own destruction.
Yeah.
And again, great point. That is not something that takes place in this novel at all. There is no moment of like, and there's opportunities for it. Like you can kind of maybe see the King parts of it that would be like the idea of the major having these bastard sons, right? That he's wronged. Like the idea of a Stebbins could be like a kernel of this is the way evil destroys itself. That this man just like this, that's supposed to be this kind of paragon of conservative virtue in this world, is actually just running around sleeping with everyone, fathering all these bastards that he's ignoring, and that's a chance for evil to rip itself down and destroy itself, or pushing the kids too far, or thinking you have it under control, thinking you've created this rabbit, and being wrong about that. But again, none of that's there. This is not a system that is defeated by standing. And I do think, that it's not that this is in opposition to King's worldview. I don't think it is. It's just like the more pessimistic version of that worldview. Like
Mhm.
I think everyone has days where they're like looking at the world and they say, things are bad, but I believe in the goodness of the innate goodness of people, and I believe that we collectively will be able to get through this whole thing. And then you have days where you turn on the news and you're just like, fuck.
Yeah.
You're just like, we're boned. Like there's like this everything is broken, and I don't think there's anything any individual or any group of individuals can do about it. And so I mean, I do think this reflects a younger, angrier version of King, but also just reflects a sentiment, certainly of the time when this book was written, but just a sentiment that I think everyone has every so often. And I think having an outlet for that, like King has, kind of allows him, when he sits down to write as Stephen King, I got that negative bad stuff out. Now I can talk about something that hopefully has a more positive thing to say going forward in the end.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I know you and I are allergic to being snobby about what is and isn't literature, but
Sure.
but it does feel like this novel is literary in a way that other King novels aren't, simply because King is often trying to be entertaining first and foremost, and this one is almost like, I care much less about whether you're entertained. I want to actually disturb you and make you uncomfortable and upset you, and have you walking away from this really reflecting on your choices and the society you live in. Because like every conversation I've had about this book with other people recently has been about how like harrowing and unpleasant it is, right?
Hmm.
Um, when the book ended, I was I the audiobook guy said, Audible hopes you've enjoyed this program, which is what he always says. And I thought to myself, I don't know if I would say I enjoyed it actually. like it's like being dragged, right? But it's like it was still one of the most rewarding reads in recent memory, right? Um, it's kind of, I don't want to say I didn't enjoy it either. It's like it's more complicated than like, oh, that was fun, didn't leave me
Hmm.
with that feeling of like, oh, that was what a fun book that was. It was like, oh my god. um which usually that's not how King books leave me. So
Hmm.
anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, I mean, like, I guess the question I have for you then is we are going to read one more Bachman book. We are after it. We are going to move into the '90s and cover Desperation, which is a Stephen King book, and he wrote a kind of I'll call it a companion book. It's not really, but also it's confusing. He wrote another book under the Richard Bachman name that is a companion piece to Desperation called The Regulators. We're going to do like one episode on that, right? So like it's a relatively short book. We're gonna read it after we finish Desperation and have like one episode talking about it. So we are going to talk about Bachman again before the season is up. But I was wondering if after this you're like really really jazzed to get into more Richard Bachman. Like, we got Roadwork, as we said, we have The Running Man. There's a book called Blaze he wrote that came out in the 2000s, and then there's Rage, which is the school shooting one that's pretty difficult to find. Are you itching for more Richard Bachman?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this has me really positively disposed toward whatever piece of King's personality he calls Bachman. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that thing you're doing there, I like that. I want more of that, please.
Cool. Yeah. And I think maybe a good place to start would be Roadwork, the one he calls his best. Probably a good place for you to start, I think.
Awesome.
I don't know if when you got the audiobook, if you bought like the audiobook to The Long Walk, or if you got like the Bachman book set, like I have an audio form that like you already own Roadwork actually, and you could just go right on and read that right now.
Pretty sure I did not do that, although that would have been smart.
You fool.
Yeah. Oh well.
That's fine. Yeah, no, I would check out Roadwork. It's I think it's much closer to what your original idea of Bachman was. Man, I'm just remembering the things that happen in this book, and it's like, whew. I don't want to spoil it for you.
Okay.
But it's heavy. It's definitely really heavy.
Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. So I think a few things that, like, we always go through this thing where we finish the book and then you and I are like chatting on Messenger throughout the week, and like we realize things that we didn't talk about during the course of the book, and we're like, oh shit, we should have talked about these things when it came up. One of them, and is just completely my bad, and oh wait, I'm a stupid idiot, is I remember specifically we had the thing where we were talking about the Hopi Native American tribe, and we were like, I wonder what King's trying. What do I think King's trying to say with this Native American tribe at the front of this very long, arduous walk in which people die? Well, I don't know. And like for whatever reason, the phrase "the Trail of Tears" just like never freaking occurred to my stupid dumb brain. And then like it's so obvious that I just got really mad at myself.
Yeah, and Stebbins wearing moccasins.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, man. It never occurred to me directly either. And it is obvious. It almost makes me want to go back and look at those conspiracy theories about The Shining being about Native American burial ground or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely a commentary on the idea that it's an interesting mixture of this critique of like we take our young men and we chew them up and destroy them for basically no reason, while telling them, attaboy, you're a hero, nonsensically, right? And
Yeah.
then the Trail of Tears, and basically the way that this country behaved toward the Native Americans in general as this terrible stain on our history.
Yeah.
That is I think, if you really step back from it, I think being like celebrated. I think the Long Walk is a celebration of the suppression and genocide of the Native Americans within the frame of the novel. Like, I don't, not that there's any textual support that said, like, the major doesn't look at the camera and say that, but I feel like it's a reasonably safe assumption. Do you feel me there at all?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think to take a thing that we did to these people, like, I mean, yeah, it's really fun to be like, what kind of society would allow this thing to happen? And it's like, well, ours.
Yeah.
I mean, not ours specifically, but our ancestors. But like it happened. It happened, and not quite as commodified as the Long Walk is, but I agree with you. Like, this is taking this horrible thing that we did and commodifying it, gamifying it, making it a fun celebration. And I think something that you pointed out to me was that, like, another word for the Trail of Tears was the Long Walk, right? And I think this feels like something King did specifically, and to put two Native American boys at the vanguard of this walk for as long as they were there is like, duh.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I do think it is a part of the horror of this world, is that they've taken this terrible thing that we did in the past and gamified it, commoditized it, celebrated it, turned it into something for fun, for entertainment.
Right. Turned it into entertainment. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it was funny because it's not that it even occurred to me. What happened was, I was talking about this book with my dad, and the question came up of just like, how far did they walk in the Long Walk? Because surely someone at some point has calculated this,
Mm-hmm.
based or whatever. So I just searched on my phone, like, how, like, the Long Walk novel, how far, or some combination of words like that. And the first thing that came up was the Long Walk, also known as the Trail of Tears. It was like, oh, yeah, oh, So,
Yeah.
which was actually, I don't want to say it was similar in length to the Long Walk in the novel, because I don't think that's correct, but it was, or maybe it was. It wasn't so similar that I jumped out of my chair and said, "Oh my God, it's exactly the same." But it was a number where I was like, "That's." I bet Stephen King saw how long the Trail of Tears march was, and then calibrated the distance in the Long Walk to be sort of in that ballpark. That was my thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, like, it wasn't like it was.
Like
It's like it's like a name given to, like, the series of Native American removal that went on under Jackson, like, of several tribes, right? So it wasn't one trail, one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a great distance. Like, these were tribes that were in the South and moved all the way to Oklahoma in most cases, right? So it was definitely hundreds of miles, certainly. So
yeah.
I mean, I mean, I do think, I guess the one thing I'll say about this is it is interesting that, like, we're saying, duh, this connection is so obvious and so clear, but none of the tribes that were, involved in this were the Hopis, right? So I believe it was I have it pulled up here, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Muskogee, and the Seminoles are the five big tribes that were part of this. So, like, you wonder if King was like, well, I can't just say Cherokee because then everyone will get what I'm doing immediately. So I'll put some Native Americans in here to kind of gesture towards this idea, but it's not going to be that. I don't know. Yeah. I'm just guessing here.
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting thought, though.
But yeah, I mean, that was something that like as soon as we collectively realized that, I was like, I can't believe we didn't talk about this on the show during that one part. Like I've seriously like went back and listened to myself, and I'm like scratching my head. I was like, what are we trying to say with about racism
I
with
don't know.
these two Native American characters?
What a
Like, why did we
strange.
make them Native American? It's a mystery. It's a mystery that I cannot crack.
What a strange random insertion of this element. Yeah. No, it was funny in retrospect. Yes.
Very funny, very funny. But that's, I mean, even we just completely miss stuff sometimes.
Yep.
So I say I don't like the way I phrase that, even we, because that makes it seem like I am awesome and I never miss anything. But even I fuck up just one time.
Yeah. It was an exception. Yeah.
So I think there's another comparison that we didn't make throughout the course of the show that I think you regretted specifically not making. So I'll let you take that one over.
Yeah, it's definitely been way too long since I made an overt Lord of the Rings reference.
Did I tell you that we got a comment on one of our Dark Tower episodes from years ago, very recently? I think it was a YouTube comment that was like, geez, Matt, you're really reaching for some of the Lord of the Rings references here.
Well, so the true story is that you told me that, and then that got me thinking, how could I make some more Lord of the Rings references about this book?
Oh, is that how this happened?
It is.
I'm so happy.
And then it clicked. So thank you, stranger, who said that I think about Lord of the Rings too much. You've nudged me back into who I truly am. So the comparison is to view McVrees as a kind of Samwise Gamgee. I don't think it's tenuous, but neither do I think it's like obvious. It's basically just the idea that you have really these two characters who become really dear friends to each other. You have this element where they form a bond that's so strong that it can be called this fraternal love. And with the wrinkle that McVrees is really sort of taking on a sort of servant role, sort of secondary role to Garrity. He's helping Garrity carry his burden, is what he's doing. He is, you could almost say, you could literally say McVrees is the reason why Garrity wins, because every time Garrity starts deteriorating mentally or physically, McVrees is there to help him out, either mentally or physically, as the case may be. He the equivalent of sort of bearing the ring for those moments when Frodo can't bear the ring, and then giving it back to him, because at the end he's like, he doesn't want to win. He's not there to win. He's there to punish himself. So he just sits down and lets Garrity take it. And there's definitely a lot of ways in which it doesn't quite match, to be sure. And I don't really, when I say match, I'm not thinking that King sat there consciously being like, McVrees is definitely Samwise.
Yeah.
More that I think that King loves Lord of the Rings, and so the idea of like the humble hero and his even humbler sort of friend servant character is something that makes its way into a number of his books. Actually, I'm thinking about the Talisman, for example. So yeah, that's all I got there.
No, I love that, and I think you're absolutely right. The entire, like, yes, it's not supposed to be a 1-to-1 analog for Sam, but the concept of I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you, I think is completely McVrees throughout a lot of this novel. And as you pointed out, even the paternal friendship bordering on romanticism that people have long labeled Sam and Frodo with, I think exists with these two characters as well. Although, because Stephen King is Stephen King, he's a bit more explicit about the confusion around those feelings. Although I firmly, like, in the Lord of the Rings side of things, firmly believe that was designed and created as a completely fraternal relationship. But not saying that anyone read anything else in that is like quote unquote wrong. I just think that's not the author's intent, and you can take anything from it you want, of course. This inspects and examines that kind of relationship much more explicitly, because I think it's very much a book talking about sexuality, and as you said last week beautifully, I think that the trauma around sexuality for our main character.
Yep.
Yeah. So So we've said that now. You got your Lord of the Rings stuff in. You really got to work on this, Matt. I mean, it's really, really disappointing.
Well, now you all know that anytime you criticize me for talking about Lord of the Rings too much, I'm just going to do it more. So,
I mean, it is interesting that, like, I don't think any character in this book referenced Lord of the Rings. I mean, like, I do think it's interesting that they went with Musketeers and not like Fellowship,
mm-hmm.
right? Because that, I mean, King, as you said, loves Lord of the Rings. He absolutely does, and that would be a well that I think he would absolutely dip into, of having a character who loves Lord of the Rings talk about them as a fellowship.
Yeah,
but he doesn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, just to ping off of that, I mean, it is, that would be a pretty perfect apropos reference, because like the Fellowship, you know, they kind of fall off one by one. Of course, the Fellowship doesn't all die, but they do kind of disintegrate, right? And so you've even got like the Fellowship breaking as these characters die. I mean, it's possible that I like what you said a second ago about King, like not wanting to be overt and obvious about his references, and so him kind of actually backing away from the idea that like this is the Fellowship, not making that reference. Usually he does make the explicit references, but maybe this is the one spot where like the difference between, I kind of love this actually, the difference between King and Bachman is that Richard Bachman never read Lord of the Rings.
How could he? No, I actually really like that idea. Or maybe read it, just not a fan.
Yeah,
just didn't care for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really as you were talking, I'm like frantically trying to open up the book here and do a search for Lord of the Flies, because I'm curious if this book makes an overt Lord of the Flies reference as well. Because I wonder, like, if there is an attempt for like, I'm not seeing Lord of the Flies in here at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that again, I think in a Stephen King novel would possibly be something that the characters in the book would directly reference as well. And I mean, there is some novel references, and there's of course pop culture references in this thing as well. But I do think, I wonder if King consciously toned this stuff down, because he was releasing under a different name.
Yeah, that's another reason, right? Like if he's self-aware about the fact that he talks about Lord of the Rings constantly, he might avoid doing it just to keep it on the down low. Yeah,
which just shows how different he is from you.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. So, okay, one last thing I wanted to talk about, and then we can get into our mailbag questions, is I wanted to talk about the world building, because I think we posed a question very early on, which was, this book is kind of intentionally vague. It doesn't really fill in a lot of the background, and I think I asked you, is this a bug or is this a feature? Is this King is still a fledgling writer, still learning on how to craft stories, and just wasn't good enough to craft a fully fleshed out, believable world behind the walk? Or was this an intentional choice that elevates the novel? And I'm curious here at the end, having seen the whole thing, what is your opinion on this? Do you think the novel is better for not having all this stuff fleshed out, or do you think, you know, a better version of the same story also gives us a little bit more tangible detail on the world around the walk?
Well, I always like it when world building is tantalizing and leaves me asking questions, leaves me imagining, right? Leaves me pondering, thinking like, well, what does that mean? Or gives you just enough of a sketch of an idea for you to kind of extrapolate on your own. And I do think, you know, exactly. So I like it for that reason, but I also think it just is appropriate for this book because he wants you to know that it's not quite our world, but that the ways in which it's different are not anything that matters. I want to rephrase that in a way that makes more sense. It's not like you can explain, oh, that world is different from our world because of X, and therefore I don't have to consider the problems with my own world because X isn't true about my world. that's this other fucked up world over here, this fantasy world where X happened. And sure, if X happened, you could imagine that there would be institutions like the Long Walk. But
Mhm.
luckily, no X in my world, so I'm just going to not think about this anymore. And he doesn't give you that. It's like there's no answer. There's no answer for why the world is the way it is. And that's important. Like that's functional
Yeah.
that he doesn't give you that answer.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. I've said this before. I am not like a huge world building person. Like I do not go to my storytelling for world building in and of itself. I think it certainly is necessary in most of the stories I read and enhances the stories. But yeah, I mean, I look at this and I just like to play devil's advocate, like ask the question of like, I love this book. I think this book is phenomenal. And this book is super, super vague about the world. So then I ask myself the question, okay, would I love it more if it was less vague, or would that hurt it? And I mean, I think the concept is so good, and the execution of the concept is so good, and the characters are so good that like if we got like a 3-page thing that like outlined exactly what happened in this alt world where Germany didn't lose World War II in the same way, and like flesh that out and like saw how the United States, reformatted itself to become this country that it was now, and like the origins of the walk and what the first walk was. Like if King spent a few pages doing this stuff, like I don't think it ruins the book. Like I don't. Um, but I think I'm with you that like I don't think it would like turn the book from really really good into like masterpiece. And I do think there's some fun in there. Like there's just talking about trying to grab the nuggets of entertainment in this very dour depressing book. There's some fun stuff in there where he just gets to throw stuff in like the part about successfully invading the German nuclear facility in Chile or something,
Mm-hmm.
and the listener get to be like, oh, I'm sorry, what now?
Yeah.
and there's some fun entertainment in there. So yeah, I mean, I do think if I had to go back in time and ask 21-year-old Stephen King, like, did you intentionally leave all this stuff out? Did you intentionally leave this as vague as possible? I think he would say yes. And I think he would say yes for the exact reason that you said, which is I don't want to give my reader an out. I don't want to give my reader an excuse to label this as an alt world and not my world. I want them to feel like it is my world. And obviously there are differences, and I have to gesture towards the differences because we don't have a long walk. But I want them to feel like this thing would be right at home in our world, because in his mind, if this is specifically a Vietnam protest piece, right, it is like there. That's our analog there. It exists right here, right now.
Yeah. I agree with all of that. I like it this way. I like this thing about King in general. I mean, the whole Dark Tower thing where he's sort of extremely vague with his world building. It's
Mm-hmm.
like perfect. I love it. I
Yeah.
prefer it this way personally.
Totally. All right. Let's jump into our mailbag.
All right.
Do you want to read the first one and then we'll go from there?
Sure. So Richard G says, thanks for choosing this book. I don't think I ever would have got to this story otherwise, and I'm all the better for it. Well,
that's great to hear.
Yeah,
great to hear.
I'm glad. I hope that's true for a few people out there. The discussion question is in regards to the ending. The stories that end with an unknowing or an open to interpretation seem to be the ones that stick with me the most. Maybe Ray started running after a dark silhouette and dropped dead 10 steps past the major. Maybe after another 200 meters, they finally stopped him and he came to his senses, and he asks as his wish that nobody has to endure this barbaric race ever again. We don't know, and that's what makes it so interesting. I guess my question is, why do you think some people hate endings like this so much? Roland's story doesn't have a happy ending, but it's also not a doomed ending. Neither is Ray's. My interpretation is Ray lost his mind, and using the metaphor of a greyhound chasing a rabbit, he's caught the rabbit and has nothing left to race for. But that's the beauty of these endings. You get to decide, and that's what makes them so special.
Yeah, this is a great question. And to me, my answer is it all comes back to what you go to your entertainment for. like, why are you reading a book? Why are you watching a movie? Why are you watching a television show? Um, there are people out there that love the uncertainty and the unknown, love to do what Richard's doing here, which is, think about it afterwards and decide, what my version of the ending is, what that means to me. And there's people that hate that kind of stuff. There's people that go to stories and first of all, they want a happy ending, but they also want to be told what the story means and what it was about and what happens. And I know this because my father, I love him to death, is one of those people. My dad does not like unhappy endings. He does not like depressing endings. He hates the ending of The Dark Tower. He hates the ending of just about every Stephen King story for this exact reason, that he does not want these stories to end in these kind of ways. And like, from that perspective, I can totally understand why you would look like at a book like this and be like, what the fuck was the point of all this? Nothing was solved. Nothing was learned. Nothing happened. It's just a bunch of kids walked until they died. The end. And that's true, right? And that's I think that one of the beautiful things about art and storytelling in general is everyone goes to it for different things to get different things out of it. And so I think the people that tend to not like endings like this are people that don't want that kind of ambiguity in their storytelling, that perhaps face that kind of ambiguity in their life and don't like it, and go to storytelling for there to be a world with clear yes, no, fact, this is what happens type of stories.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think even a younger version of me might have reacted similarly, because if you've been told that like one of the important things for a story to have is some kind of catharsis,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have a book that just says "fuck you," then you sort of feel like the book made a mistake. When actually the fact of the matter is that books do not have to be any particular thing or have any particular
Mm-hmm.
structure or give you any particular feeling. There is no such contract. Um, I was annoyed at some book that I read recently that I whined to you about, because I felt like the ending was just incredibly nihilistic
Yeah.
and depressing. Um, but like, and I didn't particularly like it in that case. I think the difference between this and that is like that was just this like, oh shit, like everything is meaningless ending, whereas this one had this amazing like powerful feeling of like, no, that like this journey had meaning. It's not despite the fact that what you said is true, that sort of nothing is gained. um the story itself had meaning, and it impacted me, and it changed how I think about things. So I couldn't I'll be honest, I felt a little pang when the story ended. I was like, like that that's not resolution.
Yeah.
My brain wanted resolution.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
like the next like second, I was like, but that's exactly the right ending for this book.
Mm-hmm.
This book should not give you resolution. That's not the kind of story this was.
Yeah.
Um, so I get it, but I don't even like hold it against people who feel that way about
No.
books like this.
No, me neither. And I think that the hardest thing to talk about when we're talking about stuff like this is when we start using a phrase like bad ending, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about, was the ending bad in that it was poorly written, it didn't execute on the promise of the book, it didn't culminate in a satisfying way. No, that's even wrong. Not in a satisfying way. If it didn't culminate, if it didn't,
Mm-hmm.
like, the fundamental, structural, everyday writing, storytelling type stuff, there's that kind of bad ending. And then there's what I think most people mean when they say things like, oh, the long walk has a bad ending. What they mean is disappointment. What they mean is lack of resolution. What they mean is it didn't get the things that they're going to for storytelling. And I think it's very hard sometimes to really differentiate between those two things. And this is something we've said many times on across our podcast, is people are very, very good at knowing when they did not like something. They're generally very bad at explaining why they did not like it, because it's complicated. Sometimes you're just having an emotional reaction and you're looking and you're grabbing for reasons for that, and a lot of the reasons are tangible, things that look and appear like just well, this is a plot hole
Yeah.
or didn't make sense or things like that, when the actual reason is just so much more complicated than that.
Yeah. It's easy to grab for superficial things, but yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I love these kind of stories. I love these kind of endings. I love the top in Inception. Not was it about to fall over there? Was it not? I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Even
Me
though
too.
I don't particularly love that movie, but it feels like the example of this kind of ambiguity.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm just reminded when you say that of all the people I heard walking out of the theater, just either confused or furious or arguing. When it's like, even I think I was much younger when that came out, and even I, an idiot, was able to be like, "That's the point. The point is you're supposed to have this question." Anyway,
right? Like I would like Christopher Nolan sitting at the back of the theater listening to those and going, "Yes, yes." It's what they want,
right?
Next, we have Mark Davo, who asks, given The Long Walk is one of King's earliest works, how do you think it would differ if he wrote the book today? Would it be more hopeful? Would we have gotten more backstory to some of the characters? Would the world building have been more extensive? Would Garrity have been an aspiring writer? Matt, what do you think about these? We kind of sort of talked about this a little bit already, but I think we talked about it from the frame of, was the stuff needed or not? But what do you think? What do you think 70-something-year-old King, if he sat down to write The Long Walk today, how would it differ?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on whether he is able to sort of rekindle the fire of anger that he had at this system that he saw as being so horrifically unjust, or whether he wanted to say something a little bit different or give you a little bit more of a hopeful message. I don't really know whether he has this same focus anymore. Like I really think you have to have a very specific thing you want to say and a very sort of real kind of anger in your heart to write something like this. So I think it probably would be different. It's hard to predict exactly how.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I definitely think it would be different. I do think King has always been a softie, but I think elderly King is probably the most soft he's ever been, and I don't just mean in the tummy. I think the most interesting part of this question to me was the part where he asked, would we have gotten more backstory? Would there have been more world building? Like, would pro writer Stephen King look at this and go, I really needed to explain some of this stuff more? I want to believe no. I want to believe that Stephen King would look back reading this book and say, one thing I love about this book is how little of the world I explored here. But I don't know if he's sitting down to write it today. Would he even think about doing it that way? I don't know. I don't think Garrity would have been an aspiring writer. I think Garrity's like middle of the road kind of aspiring to nothingness is key to his character.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we do have an aspiring writer that made it into The Long Walk, though. He just didn't last too long.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. As for, would we get some more backstory to the other characters? That's a thing that King definitely got better at as he got older, in terms of, sketching lovable characters in relatively little space. But I like the level of sort of spareness and shallowness. That shallowness is not the right word. Just like, these are just kind of ghosts who are moving in and out of Garrity's periphery. Like, they're not supposed to be these, vivid, memorable Stephen King characters, except for the ones who are, like Barkovich and McFreeze and so on.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it gets about as close as we can get.
I think so. All right. Shortstop 88 says a few questions here. So first question for both of us. While going through this reread of The Long Walk, I kept comparing it to my fleeting memory of Lord of the Flies. The only characters we meet for an extended amount of time are teenage boys or younger. They're both in a deadly situation, one by the loss of society and the other in the central focus of society. Both fall into insanity over a considerable length of time, the other with only 5 or 6 days. Food is provided to one, yet the mortality rate is worse than the other. And most importantly to me, one shows camaraderie in a desperate situation, while the other shows an instinctual selfishness of humans. I doubt that King wrote The Long Walk with the intention of contrasting Lord of the Flies, but I wonder if y'all had any other comparisons or contrasts between the two novels. So I mean, it's interesting that the contrast that you draw, because I was leaning more towards saying that this is his attempt to write Lord of the Flies. I agree with I think what you're gesturing at here, which is that this novel is less cynical than Lord of the Flies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the boys in Lord of the Flies turn into monsters really without anybody's prodding, whereas the boys in this book just kind of reveal their humanity and their innate kind of lovableness, only to be destroyed by the society that they live in. So
Yeah, no, that's the great distinction, is that Lord of the Flies is a message about our innate monstrousness as animals, as human beings.
yeah.
And this is definitely about how society destroys people.
I brought this up a few times, but it feels appropriate to bring up the fact that like there was some famous story of I think they were like Australian kids or something getting shipwrecked on an island, and they were like exactly the age range of the Lord of the Flies boys. And what actually happened is they just like pulled together and helped the wounded among them and found food and shared the food and were rescued in good health. And it's like, yeah, like humans can suck, but we're not that bad. Okay. Give us a break.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I generally have a optimistic viewpoint on humanity. I mean, I do think people do terrible things a lot. But I think in specifically situations like this, I think is the type of thing where you see the best in humanity often come out.
Yeah.
So yeah, Shortstop says, I doubt that King wrote The Long Walk with an intention of contrasting Lord of the Flies. Perhaps not with the intention of contrasting it, but definitely with the intention of being a companion piece to it or an attempt of it. I think, one thing we've talked about since the very beginning of the show is Lord of the Flies was a hugely influential text on Stephen King as a young man. And it has informed his writing, what he's interested in talking about. And I do think that he sat down to write this book and said, I'm going to kind of do my take on Lord of the Flies a little bit here.
I think you're right. Next question from still from Shortstop was, if you had to recommend for you, Scott, if you had to recommend another Bachman book for Matt to read, based on which do you think he'd like the most, which book would it be and why?
I think Matt would really enjoy. I think you'd enjoy all these books. We kind of touched on this a little bit more. I think you would enjoy Roadwork for the specific dourness of it. I think The Running Man would be very fun. I mean, I think it's one of those, like The Long Walk, just a wonderful, wonderful concepts that I think is executed very well. So hugely different from the movie that, I mean, like seeing the movie doesn't tell you anything about the story at all. I think, Blaze is such an interesting book. It's one of those ones that you look at and you're like, I wonder why he did this. Like, it'd be great to have a conversation with you about Blaze once, because this is a book that came out in 2007. It's one of those things. I think he says specifically that, like, oh, Richard Bachman, died years ago, but it was found in his attic and was released. But Blaze was actually like a very early novel that King wrote. I believe it was like Salem's Lot and Blaze were the two books that he wrote at the same time and brought to his publishers, and his publishers said, this one, Salem's Lot, and he kind of just threw Blaze in a trunk, and then here in 2007, decades later, pulled it out and published it. And it's really interesting. I like it a lot. I don't want to say anything about it. I like it. It's so different. It's so very it's different for Stephen King. It's like very different for Richard Bachman. It's a fascinating book that I think, and it's short too, which is it's like 250, 300 pages. So which is short for King. So it's a quick read. It's a really, I mean, I don't know if, like I say, like, oh, you're going to love the book, but I think you'd find the idea and the concept of the book fascinating.
Sure. I have no idea what it's about at all. Zero. So that's intriguing to me that you're saying this. Cool. All right. Next, a question for me. If I got the chance to do a deep dive podcast for a story in the format of We've Got Worm Again, where I'm the constant reader, me being Matt, whatever. And Scott being the newbie, what story would you choose? That's
And they say specifically that you don't have to be a book or a web serial or anything. It could be whatever you want.
yeah. I mean, not like there's no strong first place candidate. You know, among my favorite things currently are like the TV show Andor, um, which I thought was really good. In terms of books, like you and I have read so many of the same things. You know, the only thing we really haven't, you haven't read 100% of everything that Neil Stevenson has written, but like
Sure.
I don't know that that's a thing that would be the right choice for a We've Got Worms style analysis, because there really is a kind of story that lends itself to this medium
Mm-hmm.
that I don't think it's everything. I don't think everything deserves or can bear up under it or would make for particularly good conversation. There's something about the way both Wildbow and King write, although they're very different writers, that that makes this easy. Because of the way they do character and theme, you can always kind of dig into it and find something productive to say. Not all writers are necessarily like that, or they don't think the same way. I'm not answering the question, basically, and the reason is there's a reason we did Worm, and there's a reason we did Stephen King, and it's because they lend themselves to this medium really well, and not many things do, actually.
Yeah, that's fair. I honestly think Neil Stevenson would be a terrible choice. Not because I don't enjoy his novels. I do. I don't think that would work. I've read, how many of these have I read? I've read 2, or maybe I've only read Snow Crash. I don't know.
Did you read you read?
No, I read Diamond Age. We did that for a
yeah.
Yeah,
it's just it's like he's totally the wrong kind of writer for this. That's it. It's funny because like he's one of my favorite writers, but he's totally the wrong kind of writer for this. That's just a perfect example.
Uh-huh.
Do any jump to your mind just by chance?
I mean, I really want to take this idea that we have and put it in a TV series type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I kind of am ready for the challenge of doing something similar but not the same. But even that, I don't know what TV series it would be. We've joked about this for literal years at this point, but like, I legitimately don't know if you and me talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer for 700 hours would be something that would be good for either of us and entertaining. Like, I mean, there's certainly a lot there that I could talk about as far as, you know, the basics of storytelling and television writing and serialized television writing that I think is really interesting. And there's a lot of those shows that are, you know, some of my favorite TV ever. And there's a lot that are just really, really bad stinkers. And I do think overall you would enjoy your time with the show. But that's a lot. It's like 7 seasons, 22 episodes a season. That's a huge amount of time to spend on one thing. And there's already, the other thing is there's already so many people that have done that and have wonderful, like, just some of the best podcasts I've ever listened to have been Buffy podcasts. They're just really, really, really intelligent people talking very, very well about this show that I love. So like I look at that and I go, I don't want to do that. I feel like it's been done. So like there's no like TV show though that's like jumping to mind that's like a thing that you haven't seen that I have seen that I love to death that I could lead you through and have these kind of conversations on. So
sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's not easy, right? I mean, anyway.
Yeah.
That's,
I mean, the Lost show that I want to do, I think would be fun and great, but that's a totally different kind of show. Like that's we both have seen it, we're both revisiting it, and we're both seeing if something new and interesting can be gleaned from a revisit, which is good and would be entertaining. And I still think that. I always will think that. But it's not exactly what the question asker is asking here.
Yeah.
It's not that one, you know, one person that's experienced a thing is leading another new person through it.
Yep. Yeah. All right. And then last question from Shortstop is, did I ever end up playing Outer Wilds? No, I did not end up playing Outer Wilds. So that's I'm sorry. And then
What about the second half of the
what
question,
is the
Matt?
likelihood of some doof streams of the game before the end of this year? Well, there's a lot of months left in this year, so um I don't actually like streaming games that much, but not zero, because it
Hmm.
does seem like this is a game that people enjoy watching people stream. Although I've also heard it said that people can't help themselves from spoiling like puzzles and stuff, which seems not optimal.
Yes, but I will say that our viewers, every time we've done those streams, Elliot and Ruben and the audience has been just fantastic
Okay, good.
at not doing that. I think the general like viewer community, I think that is a deep problem, but I've never really experienced it in streaming those games.
Okay, well that's cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's on my very long list. So all
I would say the odds are 50-50 because either you do it or you
right,
don't.
that's how that works.
Top Yesterday 1701 asks, I noticed you have many episodes on Star Wars. Have either of you read any Star Wars novels? Well, this is a Matt question,
I have, yeah.
basically.
I read the original Timothy Zahn. Um, I forget what the name of the trilogy is, but it's like the Timothy Zahn trilogy where Grand Admiral Thrawn is sort of introduced and created as a character, and Mara Jade, I think, too. So it's like super foundational. But that's like almost all that I've read. I think I actually literally read the novelization of The Phantom Menace when that came out when I was like 12. Um, which interestingly makes Qui-Gon Jinn's character make a lot more sense. I'll just explain that in like one sentence. Is that like Qui-Gon Jinn in the book is like a practitioner of a particular like sect of Jediism, which is called the Living Force, which is like a word that he uses one time in the movie. But the Living Force is sort of like the Holy Spirit, where it's like if the Force is nudging you in a direction, then you go with it and you just kind of go with the flow. It's almost like Taoism.
Hmm.
And so like all the stupid ass choices that he makes in the movie are because the living force is nudging him in a direction. Um, and it kind of makes sense actually if it's like, oh, okay, so like the force needs him as this tool to like go find Anakin, even though it makes no rational sense. He just trusts in the force. That's like who he is as a person. Like, and it makes it very clear that that's like his internal sense of why he's doing things. He's not really thinking it out. He's just going based on the
Yeah.
intuition of the force. Not at all clear in the movie. Makes his character make a lot more sense. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Actually, I read some more of those trashy one-offs. I think I read one about like the spice mines of Kessel, and then I read one where they had to find Darth Vader's glove for some reason. I think that's it. I was really, really young when I read these. So anyway, that's it.
Yeah. For my part, I read Shadows of the Empire because they made a video game about it,
Uh-huh.
and I really like that video game. So I was like, oh, there's a book. I'll read that. And I read the episode 1 novelization
Oh,
as well.
really?
Yeah.
I don't remember talking about this.
No, I don't think we ever have.
Huh.
It's that I think that was written by Terry Brooks, right?
I have no idea.
I think it was. It is wild how much more is in that. Like, I mean, I think there's a conversation to be had about the novelization of movies because I feel like this is a really fascinating art form, actually. In which the best cases, the best versions of these things are not just carbon copies of the script that they just throw on page and then write some narrative to go in between it,
Yeah.
but like take the text and do something interesting with it. And I actually think that the Phantom Menace is one of those that just did some really interesting things with it. It's been so long since I read it, I don't remember much of it, and I was also 12 years old, so I'm not saying it was like the best written novel ever. But yeah, it's like so much more expansive on the characters, and I don't know, it certainly makes you like the characters better. I
Yeah.
agree with that.
I also remember like Jar Jar Binks being much more sympathetic because he's like actually a character, you know?
Yeah, because I mean that's the weird thing about the Phantom Menace as a movie, which I'm tired, Matt, of these fucking like Gen Z people deciding that the prequels are good, actually. Wrong? No. But the weirdest part about The Phantom Menace is sort of like The Long Walk, but like the bad version of it. There's all these gestures to like other things throughout the movie that the movie never really stops and explains, to the where you're like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And Jar Jar Binks is one of those, like, his thing between him and the rest of the Gungans is so kind of confusing and not fleshed out that you just really don't understand it, and it's like the core of his character.
And there's no reason not to, right?
Yeah,
like that would have been a perfect opportunity to just have him tell a quick story, tiny little story where you're like amused, but also maybe there's a hint of real pathos to it, and you understand who he is, right? And it's like, nope, no time for that.
And if they did do that, frankly, he was so hard to understand in some of those line reads that, like, I just wouldn't have missed it entirely.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing is that his point of view, like in his own mind writing, was totally lucid, and then he would open his mouth and speak, and it would be unintelligible, of course. I love that. Did you know? You know who wrote the novelization of the video game Crisis: Legion?
No.
Peter Watts.
What the fuck?
So just to riff on your concept on what you said about like novelizations of things can be quite a lot different and better.
This is a Doofcast episode, like, for sure. We need to do some research into this.
Oh, I've read it. But
no, I mean, I don't mean that, but I mean just the concept of novelizations.
Sure. Absolutely, we should do that. Great idea.
Yeah.
All right. Toscat7594 says, Scott, you were recently doing a chronological reread of King books, and I have been going through the same for the first time. I only have Fairy Tale left, and I was curious if there were any books you ended up liking a lot more than you expected to. For me, I personally really enjoyed Under the Dome, Blaze, and Later.
Oh, yeah, this is a really wonderful question. I, too, have finished my reread all the way until Fairy Tale. Fairy Tale is the only King novel I have not read. Still holding off on that one for the specific reason of don't know if we're gonna play a fun reverse things trick at the very end of the season or not. But I have not read that book yet. I think if you look at the season 3 list of books, you will find a lot that would fall for that for me. Like, why is The Long Walk on this list? Well, one of the reasons is I read this book as part of my chronological read/reread, and it bowled me over. I was shocked at how much I liked this book and how freaking good it was. And then I think another great one is Doomickey, which is a book I had never read. That was a first read for me when I read it as part of my chronological journey, and I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed that book. And so that's why that's on the list. There are some other reasons we'll get into when we get to it. So I like that you put Under the Dome, and we just talked about Blaze. Under the Dome is another big, huge doorstop novel, of a small town with lots of characters, and that's a really good one too. I like that you put Later on your list as well. I really debated whether or not I wanted one of the hard case crime novels as part of the season. Matt, I don't know if you know this, but hard case crime is like an imprint of specific kind of noir detective novels. And King has written 3 novels for them. One is Joyland, one is Later, and then the first one was The Colorado Kid. And they're not really actually like hard case crime novels. The funniest part about them is, like, he wrote for this imprint and they published them because it's Stephen fucking King and they were just starting out. And I think they literally like messaged him asking, like, could you write an introduction for one of our first hard case crime novels on this new publisher's imprint? And he was like, I'll do you one better. I'll write you a whole book. And it's not really hard case crime at all, but they're 3 really interesting books. And I debated long and hard whether having a discussion about one of those on this would be worth it or not. I ended up not going that. I think in the idea of crime, I went with Mr. Mercedes instead of these, but those are really interesting books, and they're very quick, very short, very fun, airplane reads, actually.
All right, cool. That's I guess I have no real comments. I haven't read any of these, but I can't wait to read the ones on this list that we are going to be reading. All right. Next question from Toscat for me. Matt, so far on the podcast, you've read and are scheduled to read a great majority of King's greatest hits. Are there some of his books not on the docket that you're interested in reading outside of the podcast? They say not including Pet Cemetery because we've discussed that as being a possible book club book. So yeah, not on my fingertips. I don't know that I have a list at my fingertips of like gotta read that one. But honestly, I'm kind of outsourcing this to you. Where I think once we finish this project, I'm just gonna be like, all right, give me the rank ordered list of the ones that are either the best or that you think that I would enjoy the most. Because I know there's gonna be a bunch.
There's tons. Yeah.
A bunch more.
Yeah.
So that's
I mean,
I don't have a good answer though.
That'll be fun. I don't want to answer that offhand, so I will take weeks to come up with that list. But no, I think there's some things popping up in my head for sure.
Yeah,
I think a good project for you would be some of the other short story collections.
Okay, yeah, I love short stories as we have talked about. I'm curious, for some reason it pops in my head that I really want to read Thinner, just because I want to see how different it is from the adaptation, and also because right now I got Bachman on the brain.
Sure.
Cool.
All right. Next, we have Steve Living Room, who asks, a big part of why I love Stephen King books are his endings. It surprised me when I joined fan pages that so many people think he has bad endings. His first question is, why do you think that is? We kind of already answered this a little bit. I think it is just down to he doesn't always give the satisfying conclusion, like the feel good, satisfying conclusion of the story. Like,
yeah,
it is layered, and sometimes bad things happen, people die. That's not what he always does, even though the endings have, I think, silver linings many of the times. I think, and also, I think this is true with King books, and I think it's true with like high concept stories in general, is that like when the concept is so good, like the concept in some of these novels are, it just starts off like super strong, and because you're just so into the idea, and just like the possibilities of the concept are like endless, and like, oh my god, this is such a fun idea, it could, like, this could go so many places. And then there's just this natural kind of like, as the number of paths and branches it could go whittle down to the one that the story is going to take, it always, it's not that it's a letdown, it's just that like it's an inevitable like result of finishing the end of those stories. It's similar to me and how I feel about a lot of horror, which is like the scariest part of any horror movie is like the first half an hour, and then it just becomes less and less scary the further into the movie you get, because you understand the thing more and you see the thing more, and you've kind of adjusted to it and are used to it. And I think the same effect happens on a lot of King novels as well.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. I think that's definitely true. Yeah, the beginnings of things just in general are often better than the endings of things just in general, setting King aside, because you're intrigued by the mystery, and then the answer almost never lives up to the mystery, and that's there's always a bit of disappointment there, not even due to some fault in King as a writer, but just like that's just how a lot of stories are. Maybe most stories even.
Yeah. I don't think his endings are bad. I quite enjoy most of them, and some of them I even love. I think they're often disappointing in that, oh, I really wouldn't have done it that way, but okay. But I think they do often fit the story they're in, which is really all you can ask for an ending at the end of the day.
Yeah. This just reminds me of how people kept telling Neil Stephenson that his endings were terrible. So finally he ended one of his books with like a almost caricatured like rom-com ending where like all the characters get married, and it's hilarious actually. And he's like, is this what you want? Anyway, that's
I do think like the idea and the concept that King has bad endings has been like memeified in the culture so much to where it is so removed from the actual beat to beat reality of the ending of his stories that it's just like a thing people assume and pass around, not even really thinking about it. I think that's happened.
Yeah, I'll buy that, because I don't know that we've ever been like, oh man, that ending, ugh, ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
There's one more question here, I think, which
okay.
is, what are your favorite Stephen King endings? Matt, I'll let you start this one first.
Well, I did like the ending of this novel a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what else. I'm scanning through the list. I love Low Men in Yellow Coats overall, and I love the ending of it in particular. I like. Okay, I'm just scanning. Um, the Dark Tower ending is perfect. I don't actually remember how the different novels of the Dark Tower end, because the way we read them, they all kind of blur
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think those are probably my top. Insomnia definitely affected me really strongly. I guess I'd have to say that is a strong contender. Yeah, that's my list.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I love the ending of The Dark Tower. I really enjoy the ending of The Stand. And I think, um, I can say this. I think the ending of it is perfect. It's really, really good. And I can't wait to talk to you about it.
All right. Me too. All right. From Pear Jane. And other folks have reached out before regarding a series closure trip to Bangor or Bangor or something like that. I don't know how
Bangor.
to say it.
Yeah.
Merchandise, etc. And besides writing reviews and joining the Patreon, which everyone should do, that's Pear Jane saying it, not me. What can listeners do to help ease the workload for you both? This is a 100% selfishly motivated question, but also 100% in understanding that you both put an enormous amount of energy into this wonderful project you've already shared with us.
So this is the I never followed up with Pear Jane after an email conversation we had months ago, and she's chastising me for it question, which is completely fair. Yeah, so I'm trying to think of how to answer this question. So I'm going to speak for myself, and I think it's true for you as well, Matt. But I'll speak for myself specifically here. We are like very good at like getting in fits and starts with certain things. Like and I think merch is a great example of this, because like we had one of our partners that does their other podcast, like basically do all the legwork on a merch store for us, except for the part where you actually have to like build the storefront. She like did all the behind the scenes side. She like put together the merch, like very very basic, just throw our logos on things merch. And it sat there not doing anything for months and months and months and months and months. And then I think literally a question. I think it was literally after we finished The Shining where someone asked like, "What's the deal with the podcast to me then podcast me mug?" We got that question, and then I was like, fuck yeah, let's do it. I'm doing merch again. We actually reached out to one of our listeners. We commissioned the mug. The mug is done, by the way. It's done. It exists. It's done. And then I went to like upload it to the store, and I got an error. Um, and then I spent like 3 hours trying to figure out what that error was and what was going on, and I couldn't figure out, and I stopped it, and that was 2 months ago now. And and so like that's kind of how it goes for me sometimes, is like I'll like get something in my head and it's like, yes, got to do this, got to do it now. I'll work at it, and if like one roadblock happens
Yeah.
on this other stuff I'm working out on the side, then I end up dropping it because there's so many other things going on. So like to actually answer the question, how can y'all help? I feel like a lot of this is just my own personal like task management problems, and I don't know how another person could help with that, because like the thing would it be is it'd be like, all right, I'll do all this stuff for you, Scott, and then you just have to approve it, and then that would take months to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you said all that, because while I was on my vacation, I was actually thinking to myself several times distinctly. I was like, when I get back from this vacation, I'm going to jump on the store because I'll be energized and I'll be ready to tackle that. And then, of
Mm-hmm.
course, as soon as I got back, I was reminded, oh, there's like 5,000 other things that are always demanding my attention. And that's why I didn't do the store before the vacation.
Mm-hmm.
But the store is a good thing to focus on, and a trip to Bangor would be a fantastic thing. Actually, funnily enough, that's like more likely to happen than us having a functional web store, because that's just a matter of planning a trip, which
So
is
yeah, and I think the thing with the trip. So for those that don't know, maybe you're didn't listen to those episodes, but we kind of had planned at the end of the second season to both of us head up to Maine and spend, a few days there exploring Stephen King's haunting ground, making our pilgrimage, as it were. And then I quickly remembered that Matt had not read it yet, and the majority of the spots in Bangor are references to it. And so it made absolutely zero sense for him to make that trip and be like, this is this part in it that you don't know about, and this is this part in it that you don't know about. And honestly, that's like 80% of the incentive for us to do season 3 was like, oh, I gotta get him to read it so we can go to Bangor. As far as like what we're gonna do there, like here's what I'll say: 99% sure Matt and I are gonna make the trip when we finish the season, right? Like that's gonna happen.
yeah.
What it will be, as far as like what kind of event it will be, I think largely depends on how many people are interested, right? Like, we don't want to plan some big, huge thing and 3 people show up, but we also don't want to plan some tiny little informal meetup and then like there's 100 people there,
Yeah.
right? So like, I guess to answer the like, how can we help? Part of the question is, once we get closer to finishing the season and we start asking questions like, how many of you are interested in being a part of this? Like, the best way people can help is to answer that and answer it as truthfully as possible.
Uh-huh.
So like it's very, very easy to say, yes, I'll come. It's a lot easier to say, yes, I'll come than it is to actually come. So like, as we get to that stuff and as we start like feeling out the interest and the numbers and that kind of thing, the best way people can help with that is to be very, upfront with the likelihood of that kind of stuff, because it allows us to get numbers and allows us to say, oh, hey, we got like 50 people coming out. Let's plan something much bigger than we originally had. Or, hey, there's only like half a dozen people or a dozen people. We can just do like an informal meetup. We'll just let people know when we're going to be there. And if they want to come, great. That kind of thing.
Well, what a well thought out answer. I was just going to be like, I don't know. Donate on the Patreon, I guess.
No, yes, definitely do that for sure. But no, that's, yeah. We Matt and I have always had grandiose, wonderfully big plans that are bigger than the amount of time we have to carry them out. I want to get the merch stuff up. Like, there's part of me like, I just want to say this: the design of the "if you podcast me, then podcast me" mug, I love it. I love it to death. Our designer, she did just a fantastic job with it. I still like look at that thing and I'm like, I want to get one of these for myself. I have no idea who else would want to drink out of this mug with this random inside joke. Like, and obviously there's people out there that would, but that is the kind of thing that gets me to hesitate on the store stuff, is like, are people really going to want to buy this stuff? And the answer we keep getting told is yes, 100%.
Yeah.
But it's tough for me to get past that sometimes.
Me too. We'll someday.
Yeah. I mean, I wish we honestly, I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the show. Have we talked about the fact that we hired a firm to like handle our social media for us for a couple months?
I don't think we talked about that now.
Yeah, so we did that. We had some extra money and we were like, let's try it. And I thought they did a really good job.
Yeah.
People probably noticed that our social media looked much more regular and much more formal than it did for the months of like January and February, I think. They did a really good job. And it was just a matter of like, we couldn't afford to keep that going and weren't seeing like dollars wise of return on investment on that kind of thing.
Right.
We were seeing a lot of engagement on social media, which was great. Love it so much. But like, how that translates to money to continue paying the people to generate that engagement on social media, just wasn't there.
That's clear.
That's the kind of thing with like, we would love to have people and to help us, and like, we would absolutely want to pay people to help us with anything we do, but like, we just can't really do that. And so I continue to appreciate everyone's help. If anyone's an artist or a designer and wants to help us, we can pay for commissions and stuff. Like that's what we did with the person who designed the one mug for us. We absolutely would love to talk with anyone who is in that space, because I am bad at that kind of stuff. Matt's much better at it than I am, but certainly Matt is not a professional graphic designer.
Yeah, it's extremely hard and time consuming, even at my level. But
Yep. So yeah, well, I mean, we're always wanting to talk with people, and it's just we're busy.
Yep.
All right. Baby, Can You Dig Your Sam asks, I recently discovered the show From, and I'm about 7 episodes into season 1. Curious as to whether or not either of you had the opportunity to check it out. I don't know where it's going, which is a lot of fun, but I'm also experiencing it like a cross between Stephen King's small town supernatural story and ABC's Lost. So, I'm really enjoying it. Hilariously, right now, they are wanting to create a radio signal on the highest point of the town to try to communicate with others. You watch this show, Matt?
No, and I don't really know what the premise is either.
Yeah, so I don't know how this happens, but this is Kyle right now. I just started watching the show 2 days ago. I am 4 episodes into the first season. I think our friends Elliot and Ruben had been talking it up to us for a long time. Had basically made the exact same pitch that you just made, Sam, which was that it's Stephen King meets Lost. So I'm 4 episodes into the first season. I am enjoying it. I think that pitch is accurate. The basic concept for you, Matt, and for our listeners is there's some town where people are driving along the road and they find themselves in the town, and then they're trapped. They try to drive out and they find themselves right back in it, and so they can't get out. And a community has sprung up here of all these people that are stuck. And then at nighttime, there's vampires. I guess we don't really know what they are, but they eat people. I don't even know if they eat them. They just kind of really fuck them up in really morbid, terrible ways. And there's so it's Kingian, and like you got the small town, big cast of characters with all their intermingling conflicts, and it's Lostian in that obviously there is a central mystery box in the middle of this whole thing. Like, why are they here? What's going on? That kind of thing. And like I like but don't love the character stuff. Like there's a lot of characters, and I'm starting to like some more. Like I don't think it's comparable to Lost, where like I thought especially in the first season the character work in Lost was just freaking phenomenal. I don't think it's quite to that level for me yet. I think it could get there though. The mystery box stuff though is really interesting and really has me. And like we talked about, this is the very beginning of the show, so like the potential of this and every little kernel that they give you of what is going on here and what could this mean is really interesting.
Yeah, well, I hope there's something in the mystery box. That's always the danger, right?
Yeah. Well, I think J.J. Abrams has nothing to do with it. So.
Well, yeah, it sounds really interesting. I'll put it on my list of TV shows.
It has Michael from Lost as one of the lead characters, which is also helps with the Lost references.
That makes sense. Okay. Vaguely related, but I did start watching Severance this weekend.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm so excited. The first episode, so we will talk about that later, though.
Yes, we will.
All right. The Grokken dude says, I was wondering, do you guys ever listen to podcasts about books you've read for the show, maybe after releasing an overview episode? I've heard mentioned before that you will avoid them so they don't influence your thoughts and audio content, but after? Being a listener of a couple of other podcasts, I've heard answers to questions you have each had before. This was mostly evident with The Company of the Mad, where a distinguished quartet took a dive into The Stand during COVID quarantine for 6 episodes. Sometimes listening to other podcasts, only if I'm caught up on my Kingslingers, I learn nuggets of trivia, and I hope you guys are hearing them too. If not King-related, any favorite podcasts in general? I personally do not listen to any other Stephen King podcasts. The reasoning is that at first it was really important to avoid Dark Tower spoilers. And then I just kind of continued that habit, just being like, well, then why would I want to expose myself to any spoilers for King? I typically, like, it is a problem. Like if I listen to a discussion about a book, any book, I will all of those thoughts from those people will just flood my brain, and I will no longer have any original thoughts. I will just repeat them. So
Yeah.
for that reason, I really do avoid criticism of the things that we're going to talk about. Sometimes for other totally unrelated books, I'll go and I'll listen to what other people think about them later. Not for King though.
Yeah. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to much fewer podcasts now than I did. Probably has something to do with the fact that I don't have a 45-minute to hour commute to and from work every day. I listen to Losers Club, especially their big book episodes, which, I mean, they kind of do a similar thing to we do, Matt, but instead of doing it across multiple episodes that takes 10 hours, they'll do like a 4 episode for one book thing. So I listen to those, especially for the ones that we've already covered. I listen to the Kingcast just about every week. Have listened to the Company of the Mad. I did listen to that after we finished The Stand. Yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely relaxed my I don't want to hear what anyone else has to say about something until after I've talked about it stance in general. Like, I used to be that, like, any of the movies we were talking about on Doofcast, like, I would like radio silence, listen to nothing, read nothing until after I recorded the episode. I've relaxed that a lot because I'm much more confident in my ability to critique and discuss a movie like that without just stealing someone else's thoughts as my own. I tend to listen to people who I will normally end up agreeing with anyway. But yeah, for Kingslingers, because it's not necessarily critique, it's more analysis. I am still very strict about that because I don't want to take someone else's opinion unknowingly and just hold it up as my own, especially if it's something like, I've been thinking about this and I think I cracked what this means, and turns out I was just taking that from someone else that I just totally forgot. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to this show in particular and this format of show, I am still very, very very strict about that kind of thing. But I will go back and listen to those shows after I've gone through them.
Yeah, I'm reminded of when we did Blood Meridian recently, and I did listen to some like college lecture discussions of Blood Meridian before the podcast. But my basic takeaway was, well, I don't want to talk about any of that stuff because that's all like about how it's referential to other literature, and I just want to talk about the book as it is. So anyway,
yeah, for sure. And I think like with Doofcast movies and stuff, like, I see our role as not only like talking about the movie and critiquing it, but also like sharing information about the novel or the movie. And so, like, if I can glean some information by listening to some other people or like listening to an interview with the director that I can share in that episode, like, that feels like something that I want to do there. And I'm less concerned about the fact that, that idea or that interpretation didn't come from me. But I feel like with this show, it's just different. So
I agree.
Yeah. As far as like other podcasts I really like, let's look here. Here's my phone. Let's look at this. I really like The Watch, which is a Ringer podcast about television. I really like You Must Remember This is a film history podcast that I really like. That's all that's jumping out to me outside the ones I've already talked about. I used to really like the McElroy stuff, all that they did, and I've just found myself listening to that stuff less and less recently. Not even because they're like worse, but just because like I have a list of podcasts and I never get to all of them, and I just been not prioritizing those.
Yeah, it's weird. I got into podcasting because I love podcasts, and I hardly listen to any anymore. Largely, like you said, because of the lack of commute, and then on the flip side, we now have so many audiobooks that we listen to between book club and this show that I always have something to listen to. So I just don't. Yeah, I just very rarely listen to podcasts, honestly. So
I think I still listen to it more than you do. But yeah, I mean, my numbers have definitely gone down.
Yep.
Daniel D says, question for Matt as we get closer to it. I know y'all have talked about it before, and he said he has a pretty good knowledge based off the cultural lexicon for Pennywise and it from the miniseries and movies. Since those are the tip of the iceberg, wondering what exactly does Matt know going into this, and what are his expectations? I'm assuming high, since Scott said this is his favorite book of all time. Also, does Matt anticipate any connections to other King stories and books? If so, what is his guess? I think we need to, before we answer this question, Matt, I think we need to do full disclosure here, which is we are recording this episode and our first episode about it basically back to back, because the episode that is going to release when we're starting it, I'm going to be on vacation. And so we were actually, for the first time ever, able to record both of these in the same week. So you, at the time of this recording, have already read, I believe, the chapters we're covering in our first episode of it. So
yeah, mostly. I'm not entirely sure that I have finished because of the because of the
We'll get
nature
into
of the
that,
first
yeah.
week's reading.
Yeah.
But and also I kind of don't know if I want to spoil people who are listening who maybe haven't read it.
Sure.
So I don't know that I'm going to really answer in detail. I think I'll just say I know a lot about like the climax of the story due to having, like, I think seen it, like one of the miniseries. I think I saw the old miniseries climax, and I kind of know the, like, oh, weird stuff that's weird, people don't, it's I know about that stuff.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about.
I do.
And,
Of course I do.
but I don't know like any of the characters. I know there's a character named Stuttering Bill now. But like I know there's tons of characters and they all have these amazing relationships, and I'm sure like what you love about this novel is probably mostly these wonderful characters that I'm going to fall in love with. I don't know anything about these characters. I don't know what their deal is or what their arcs are going to be or really anything about what to expect there. So in that sense, you can consider me almost totally unspoiled.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good answer. Are your expectations high? Have I inflated your expectations dangerously high?
I wouldn't say that I have super high expectations, other than just like I'm looking forward to a big, thick, meaty King book that's gonna entertain me for a long time.
Yeah. And it's going to be a long time.
Yeah.
November. We'll be done in November.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, great. No, I think that was great. Daniel also has one more question for both of y'all. Have either of you heard of and read any lit RPG books? It's what it sounds like, literary role-playing games, usually a story about some virtual reality fuckery or being placed in a world with game-like elements and the main character from our mundane existence all of a sudden having attributes and abilities and whatnot. They're usually a good time and pretty lighthearted. The writing is rarely ever, if ever, on the par with the likes of King. However, they are excellent palate cleansers when you have finished something particularly heavy. Matt, have you ever? I've heard of these before. Yes, I don't think I've ever read one myself.
Is Earthworld one of these? I'm asking the air because I know that you don't know. But not more. If Earthworld counts, then I've read that one, and I enjoyed that for what it was, and then it kind of like became a totally different thing midway through somehow. I don't remember exactly what was going on there. Yeah, not really. No, it's not a thing that I've read more than a tiny amount of.
Yeah. And I mean, I consider myself like a lover of story, and so I will try any type of novel or fiction or anything at least once to see if I care for it. So I would be willing to try these out, but never have. No.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's. I think another adjacent thing that you and I have enjoyed in the past would actually be live play D&D campaigns, because it's not exactly that. It's sort of not. It's it's sort of orthogonal to that, honestly, because it's the characters aren't aware that they're in a game, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think it can. I think it's also tends to be really lighthearted as well. So.
Are you listening to any of those right now? Because like I feel like I've really fallen off on some of those. Like obviously, like I don't really do the Adventure Zone anymore. Again, not because I wasn't enjoying it, but just like I guess I wasn't enjoying it enough, and it just got pushed to the back burner. I used to listen to the College Humor guys. I forget what theirs like Dimension 20, I think it was called. I listened to and loved like the first season of that, but I'm really not listening to any of those right now.
No, I don't listen to any of them. I think I have a sort of snobbish feeling that like this can't possibly come together as well as like a good novel, and so I'm not going to bother investing time into it. And that's kind of stupid because the Adventure Zone balance arc came together incredibly well, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what I'm talking about, but that is the thought that goes through my head anyway.
Sure. Yeah. And of course, nothing will ever be as good as Weaver Dice Vegas, right? So
that's true, with its super satisfying ending.
Yeah. Any day now, that's coming out. Any day.
Yeah. That's another trip that we have to do. Is you, me, Michael, and Daniel have to like meet somewhere in person and finish Weaver Dice Vegas. I
would have to like consume myself in my character. It would take weeks.
Well,
probably.
You could probably just listen to the show.
No, can't do that.
Oh, okay.
I don't have time for that.
Okay.
All right. Last question, Matt.
Okay.
It's yours.
Oh,
you read it.
Okay. I got you. I'm there with you. Kai Mai 1919 says, I was curious if any more thought has gone into a Kingslingers season 4. Perhaps a listener's choice where we can vote on the books and maybe Matt can pick a few he's interested in. Or if there is not a Kingslingers season 4, then if you guys have considered tackling another work by Wildbow like Twig or Pact.
There is currently no plans to do a season 4 of Kingslingers. We are calling this the final season, and it's currently that's going to be it. I think we've kind of answered a version of this question before, which is like, once we finish these books we're covering here, with maybe some random one-offs, there's really like these are the ones that I definitely like wanted to talk to you about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like we've gotten there. And I don't want to do this forever. Like,
yeah.
So like, I definitely don't want to do a thing where we're doing every single King book. I don't think that would be a good show at some point. So it feels like the perfect place to kind of knock it off. That being said, I do think you and I have both already said, if Mike Flanagan's Dark Tower television series does happen, and is released and viewable, we're definitely going to have to do like an episode by episode discussion on that thing. So I think pending any new Dark Tower things, like if King suddenly says my next book is Dark Tower novel 8, pending that, no plans for season 4.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Have we considered tackling another work by Wildbow? It's funny, when I read those words, the thought that came into my brain was, didn't we already cover Twig or Pact? And then my brain said, no, that was other people.
Yeah.
That was not you. And then I said, oh yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we have our friends we have two sets of friends that are part of our network doing Pact and or Pale by Wildbow right now. There's people that are just good friends of the show that are doing a Twig podcast right now as well. What is that one called again? I need to remember.
Is it Twigging Onto Twig?
Yes. It's a great name.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like that's covered. I'm not like, I will never say never, but I feel like that's covered. I enjoyed our time with Wildbow's novels. I loved doing both Worm and Ward, and I will continue to follow what he does into the future. But I don't think we have any plans to, certainly not any of the ones that exist right now.
Yeah, in terms of percentage of a person's life spent covering Wildbow books, I would say that our percentage is currently fairly high, and maybe in a few decades I'll need to bump it back up. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. I think only Elliot and Ruben rival our percentage.
That's true.
Yeah. But that being said, as the closer we get to the end of the season, the more Matt and I are going to be having internal conversations about what do we want to do next? What is it going to look like? Like, we're not going to just quit doing this because we finished season 3. So we're going to be doing something. We just, I think it's December 2024. We're going to be finishing this season of this show. And that's only if we have no more missed weeks or delays or anything, which is very unlikely to happen. So we got some time, and we're going to definitely take advantage of that time to really think of what we want to do. Because we want to continue to challenge ourselves. We want to continue to learn new things and do new things, but also be entertaining.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. That was the last one, right? Yeah. Let me check. Yeah. That was the last question. So we did it. Those are some really great questions, y'all. Thank you so much for sending those in. And I think that's going to do it for us here this week, Matt. How long have we been going?
Yeah, about
we're almost
2 hours.
How do we? These are supposed to be the shorter ones.
I know, but it's just so fun to answer people's delightful questions. Those were very fun. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's it for us here on Kingslingers. Next week, it begins. Officially, it's happening. And we'll be reading and discussing, and this is what Matt meant about the confusion of where to stop. We are going to be reading chapters 1, 2, and half of 3. So basically what happened is chapter 3 of this novel is like 120 pages long. And so if we just cover chapters 1 and 2, it would mean we were only covering 30 pages in a week, and then we would still have to cover chapter 3 in like 130 or 40 pages, and it just wouldn't work. So we have to do the thing I hate doing, but we're going to do, which is we're splitting chapter 3 in half. Chapter 3 of that book is titled 6 Phone Calls. The first half of the chapter, we will be doing the first 3 phone calls, and then the second set of 3 phone calls we will be doing the next week. So each chapter has like sub chapters, and in this particular one, there are 6 characters we're being introduced to. The first 3. So we're gonna meet Stan, we're gonna meet Richie, and we're gonna meet Ben, and then we're gonna stop reading after.
All right. And no, I haven't read all of this week's reading yet. Apparently.
You better get on it, man, because we're recording that like soon.
I know.
Yeah.
Cool.
But so that's next week, chapters 1, chapters 2, and the first 3 subsections of chapter 3. This is the last time this will ever have to happen on Kingslingers. This is it.
I'll hold you to it. All right. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or over on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, over on r/Doof Media, the subreddit is the place to, in the future, answer discussion questions or just to hang out with a bunch of other Stephen King nerds like us.
Yeah, and you can follow us on twitch.tv/Doof Media, where Matt will be streaming his Outer Wilds playthrough in August.
Any day now, really. Yeah.
Of course, if you're not already subscribed, there's literally never been a better time. We're getting into it. It's a huge book. It's going to be weeks and weeks and weeks of our lives, and I love this book so much. I'm so excited for it, and I don't want y'all to miss it. So please subscribe. You can find us basically anywhere podcasts are at.
And if you like any of our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia.
But if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast. It's a big book. It's a popular book. There's plenty of people that probably haven't listened to us that maybe are going to be jumping on board with it. So it's a great time to share us and let people know we're about to read this extremely popular book. You can also help us by leaving a rating and a review. This week's spotlight review comes from Lockheed P38, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Too much fun. I'm playing catch up and I've worked my way through everything up till The Shining. Scott and Matt have an easy banter that only comes from years of friendship. The tangents they go off on are sometimes more fun than the scripted bits. While I don't always agree with their interpretations, I've also had to rethink my own perceptions as well more than once. I do feel a responsibility to say one thing though. Matt, get over yourself and finish reading The Wheel of Time." Wait, didn't you? Did you not finish The Wheel of Time?
I did finish it. I think I might have said something like I didn't give it its due attention or something. Like I was predisposed against it. I did finish reading it.
I thought you did. It's me that like dropped off on book 5 when I was 16 years old.
No, I mean, this is feeling weirdly familiar. Like I said, I didn't finish something at some point, but Wheel of Time I did finish. I just mad.
Yeah, it's the the origin point for your irrational Brandon Sanderson hatred.
That's right. My famous Brandon Sanderson hatred.
We never talked about that Brandon Sanderson article. Like, I mean, we talked about it amongst the two of us, but we thought about doing a show on that, and we never did.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That freaking article, man! Holy shit!
Probably for the best.
Yeah, that was the most ridiculous thing I've ever read.
Weird passive aggressive hit piece. Yeah.
Oh, it was so weird. Like Brandon Sanderson's not even my favorite, and I was like, holy shit, man.
Yeah.
It's mean. Just mean.
Yeah, I guess I mean, it's one of those things where I cynically just have to assume that they did it because they knew people would get really mad and share it a lot. So
Yep. It's bad on purpose to make you click.
Exactly.
As the old saying goes.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lockheed P-38. I believe that's let me flex my dad muscles here and say, I believe that's a World War II plane, right? Do you know what a P-38 is?
No, I only know the P-51. Sorry.
Let's P-38 plane. Yep. American single seat twin piston engine fighter aircraft that was used during World War II. Hell yeah, dad cred earned.
P-38 versus P-51.
What, like in a dogfight? Which
like
would win? Is that what you're doing?
No, just like what are the differences? Oh, okay. The P-38 is the really cool looking one that has the like two tails that are joined together.
Yep.
Cool. Okay.
Yep. All right, enough plane talk. We will see you folks back here next week for Stephen King's It. I'm so excited. I hope you guys are too. We'll see you then. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.